morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in right now. Welcome to another session of Experts Connect at the Networking Studio. I'm your facilitator, Linda Ruggieri, and we have an amazing guest that I know all of you have been looking forward to today, Jennifer Lawler. Many of us have taken her classes in different capacities and at different times of our careers, and Jennifer, you don't know this, but when I put out a call out, a little poll in our space, I asked, if you could meet anyone, any editor, is there any editor that you would like to meet, that you'd like to get a chance to talk to? Who would that be? I mean, you were in our top three. I would say, yeah, you were like right there on the top of people wanting to know what's your magic, how did you create, bring all these skills to the table and start applying them as a freelance editor, and just really get to know what your process is like and what suggestions you might have for the rest of us who are either current developmental editors or we're thinking about it, going into developmental editing but aren't sure we might have the skills. So that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today, but I do want to share Jennifer's quick bio, and then I'll let her also introduce herself. But Jennifer has worked as an editor for more than 20 years. She learned how to edit in the trenches of traditional publishing with insane deadlines, pitiless competition, and crushing bureaucracy. And I'm hoping that has changed a little bit nowadays with the more competition that's coming in from the indie market. Jennifer also has a PhD in English literature with a specialization in medieval literature, because of a long story that she might share with us today. And she's worked for Simon & Schuster, for Girl Friday Productions, for Glencoe McGraw-Hill, Barnes & Noble Custom Publishing, along with a lot of other indie publishers and independent authors. So welcome, Jennifer, to our networking studio and our members.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here from sunny Spain, where it's getting on towards the evening now, but you guys are just starting your day. So I can tell you it's a good day. So since I've already been through it, it's a good day.
Excellent. Excellent. Hey, Jennifer, did I miss anything? Was there anything in your background that you wanted to share with us?
Well, I think you kind of caught it all. But what I really love about publishing as a career, especially when you're an editor or a writer-editor, is that there are so many roles you can take on in the world. My career has gone through lots of changes as the environment has changed. Depending on what people are willing to pay me for. So one of the things that I think is really important is just to be able to stay flexible and to go where the road takes you and not be too wedded to your career being a specific, exact, as you picture it. So just letting things unfold, I think, has been a really crucial element of my career.
Sorry, I'm muting myself because I have construction workers in the house, and so I'm afraid that some of the noise might come through. I think one of the things that you mentioned, flexibility. That's such a key word and a key concept to have, especially for editors that are maybe coming out of a structured editing certificate program where we're taught like, this is what you do. This is, it's step one, step two, step, and these are the rules. And this is the definition of copy editing and line editing, and you shall not cross one or the other. And so knowing that sometimes you will be required to be flexible, and and I've mentioned this story that I started off also proofreading until I decided I really don't like proofreading. This is just incredibly stressful, and I would much rather do developmental editing and line editing. So allowing yourself that flexibility to know that things will change and will shift, and when is the right time for you to shift. And Jennifer, how did you get started as a developmental editor? Did you just decide, did you read it in a book? Were you at, one of the publishing houses and they're like, this is what you have to do now? Can you give us a little bit of that background?
Sure. So I actually started out as a copy editor, and I'm always a little bit hesitant to tell this story because I wasn't very prepared to be a copy editor. I didn't really, I had an English degree and a background in writing, and I thought I was good with the language, but I didn't really have a firm grasp on what like the Chicago Manual of Style was or anything like that. But what I did have was, a fair amount of confidence that I could figure it out. And I think that really helps is just to feel like you can figure it out, to trust yourself to figure it out. A lot of times we're sort of waiting for permission for someone to say, okay, you've got the credential, you've got the seal of approval. You go out and you can now do this. And, to some degree, it does help to have that background, to have the training, to have some experience. But for me, anyway, it was helpful just to sort of jump in and learn as I went along. The best way to learn editing, as I've always said, is to do editing. And so that's kind of what I did. I just started off. I had this degree. I knew I needed to make some money. I wanted to be a freelancer. I didn't particularly want to get a staff job. And so I just sent out letters of introduction to publishing companies. And this was a long time ago, so the internet wasn't, I mean, even when I started, there even wasn't even an internet. So we just used a print book called, what was it called? The Writer's Market. And so you could find the names of publishing companies and editors at the publishing companies and things like that. And so I would, snail mail them letters and tell them I was available for work. And that's how I got the work. I got that work. But like you, Linda, I found out that copy editing wasn't really my favorite thing in the world. And so, because I was also a writer, I started ghostwriting. And then from ghostwriting, I was asked to do some developmental editing for authors who had had a concept for a book and maybe turned in a draft that was, okay, but needed a lot of work. So it wasn't exactly ghostwriting. It was sort of a significant developmental edit. And then from there, it became working in fiction. And then I started Club Ed about 7 years ago. And I started teaching editing at the FA about 10 years ago. So that's kind of the
Wonderful.
evolution.
And were you director of programming or education also at EFA, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, I was the education chair, and that was a lot of fun because you got to interact with people who had really great ideas and who were doing things that, like, don't do or don't know how to do, medical editing and things like that. So I always felt like it was a position where I could learn a lot. So that was a lot of fun. The EFA is a great organization, and I strongly recommend people join it especially if they're newer editors or aspiring. There's a lot of benefits to developing collegial relationships with other editors, and that's a great place to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I know that some of you that are here have thought about ghostwriting. You've considered it, but maybe you're like, I don't know that. But I love that Jennifer sharing this story of how sometimes you end up doing a certain type of editing because something else brings you there, and then you discover that is a joyful kind of work, and that you're good at it. And so when you don't always arrive to specific types of editing on just one path, you can get there in many different paths, and sometimes it might be ghostwriting. And I know there's a few writers here in our group as well. And so you develop Club Ed, you start talking to editors, you're fine-tuning your developmental editing skills and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And over the years, what have you seen that if for somebody that might be considering developmental editing, what are some good qualities or common qualities that developmental editors have that you see kind of, that goes across the board?
So one thing that I think is underestimated is how helpful the ability to copy edit and to line edit is as a developmental editor. Even if you're working with indie authors, you typically they do want a little bit of line editing with their development, and depending on the project, that may or may not be an approach you want to take. But with publishers that I work with, they always want their developmental editors to understand copy editing. They're not expecting you to copy edit, but you have to kind of understand the underlying concept so that you don't make things worse or more complicated, or so that you understand the decisions that need to be made in the process. So that's kind of one underrated skill for developmental editors that I think is helpful to have. Not that you have to master it or do copy editing for people, just that having a fundamental knowledge of how it works is very helpful. But I think, especially as freelance editors, I think the difficult thing is that marketing can be a challenge for freelance editors, because a lot of times we love books. We read, that's the reason we're doing this. We read a lot. We're, often introverts. And so that whole aspect of marketing is really difficult. And so people struggle with that, and they end up a lot of the times on platforms like Upwork or Readsy, because they want the work to come to them without them having to go out and get it. And that's okay. I mean, those are places are okay to start, and some people actually do okay on them, and they make enough money, to suit their purposes. But for most people on those platforms, it's not viable. They don't make enough money at that, and so it gets into this really frustrating treadmill where you are working really hard to make very little money, and it's difficult when you're working that hard and making very little money to actually sort of have the time and the mental capacity to find those better opportunities, whether it's finding indie authors who will pay better, cultivating an audience that will that has a bigger budget, or whether it's targeting publishers and getting a little more stability in your pay and in your cash flow. So one of the skills that I think is really important is it's not that you have to go out and be like this, used car salesperson, the way that I think so many of us have that in our heads. Do not want to be that smarmy used car salesperson. But it's really important to understand how marketing is necessary, and to sort of find ways to be comfortable with that. You don't have to be that smarmy salesperson. You can think of marketing as just connecting with people and telling them about what you do. And that's a lot easier for us to embrace. And as I know, the networking studio, like one of the greatest ways to market is just to network with people, just to connect with people. And they don't all have to be writers that you're connecting with. Other editors can be your colleagues. This is a very generous occupation. People are usually very friendly and helpful. Some people are not, but most people are very generous with their time, and they want to help you. They want you to do well. It can also be really helpful just to get to know other people associated with publishing in whatever way. Like, I know one of my students made a connection with a cover designer, and the cover designer has become one of her greatest leads for editing work. And that kind of thing, that sort of being open to connecting with all kinds of people who are even just sort of tangentially, I guess, related to publishing can help. And just, kind of letting go of the idea that marketing is hard and horrible, and embracing the attitude that you can enjoy it. You can find things about it that are even enjoyable. That is a huge thing. And, because I think most of us here, we love books. We understand how stories are told. The skills are not the hard part. Developing the skills are not the hard part. It may take a little time to learn some methods or to grasp certain concepts, but overall, if you're a big reader of books and you love stories and you care about how they're put together, the skill part, the learning how to be an editor part, isn't really the hard part. So it's that how to make it a business, how to make it a career. That's the hard part.
One of the things that it dawned on me, well, Brittany and I, and you've talked to Brittany many times as well, when we went to our first IBPA conference, that we were there because of our book, but without really thinking anything. We were just there for our book and this award ceremony. And then the minute we walked into the conference room the first day, because we decided to attend the conference just out of curiosity to see what these indie publishers did, we realized that everybody in that room was a potential client or a potential referral, or everybody, because everybody at some point in that industry interacts with an editor or one type of editor.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we don't do things because we're like, oh, there's nothing in it for me. But I like going to writers conferences because I like to learn what are writers being taught in terms of craft and character development and character. So writer conferences are great places not only to meet writers and potential clients, but also to learn what it's like on the other side when they're trying to develop things, and maybe even to pick up on vocabulary or language or expressions that are used in the writing world that might resonate more when I'm doing a query on one of my, editorial letters or on one of the edits. So yeah, and I like what you're saying, that the skills can be learned, and that's not the difficult part. The difficult part is actually going out there and letting people know what you do, for sure. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was going to say conferences. I love conferences. And especially at the beginning of my career, I went to a lot of conferences, and they weren't all like, occasionally it was an editor conference, but they were usually writers' conferences or something somehow connected to publishing. Um, because just meeting people face to face. I mean, some of the colleagues I have had throughout my career, I've known them from the beginning, and we've seen each other through sometimes very difficult times. And those relationships are easier to maintain if you've actually met somebody face to face. I'm not dissing online relationships. I have some very dear friends I've only ever met online. Um, but if you can get face to face with people, it can be really transformative for your career and the way you're thinking about your career. Um, and even if your only access is like online, it's still, there's something about being in a room with a bunch of other people who care about the same stuff you care about that is really energizing and motivating. So I do love conferences for that reason.
Jennifer, and in your years as you've been teaching developmental editing, which I think is what you're most known for, even though you
Yeah.
do a lot of other things, what do you see, like, what are the common mistakes that sometimes editors that are new to developmental editing, or maybe they're very experienced, but they, make these mistakes? What are some of those mistakes that people make or editors make when they're working on projects?
Um, well, one of the mistakes I think that is really common, just sort of in a general way, is underestimating how much time a project is going to take. And I did this a lot early in my career, where we don't recognize that that main pass that you take with the manuscript is just one part of the process. There's that first read through, then there's other passes, there's a review, there's letting things sit for a while you're trying to figure out what's going on. And if you don't get that time figured out, it's very easy to undercharge. And then you're again, and that's this constant struggle of not having enough time or enough money or anything. That's really difficult. The other thing is, I think people have a tendency to absorb rules as if they were somehow true. So the other day, someone had posted on LinkedIn, I didn't say anything because I don't, embarrass people in public, but someone on LinkedIn posted that your novel needs to have 20% dialogue. I don't know where that rule came from. 20% dialogue. Who made that rule? You know, where did that rule come from? That is not a rule. But people are sharing information like that as if it were somehow a fact of storytelling. And I've read novels where there is no dialogue, or where it's 70% dialogue, and they can still all be really, really good books. So not getting wedded too much to rules that we think are true um, about how to tell stories. One of the things I often say is that the manuscript itself will teach you how to edit it if you're just paying attention to the manuscript, and think that that's important to remember. Because I can teach you things about goal, motivation, conflict, and how to make sure that readers aren't confused about what's happening on the page, and I can talk about how info dumping affects pacing and things like that. But those are all just ways to think about what you're encountering, and ways to maybe analyze or critique what you're encountering, so that you can run it through your meter and say, okay, this pacing is really off. Maybe it's because there's too much description of things. So, but that is not to say that there can be no description of things, or that some novels do benefit from having like a really elegant slow-paced world building that some readers really like that. Some writers are very good at that. So there's not one right answer to any of this. Um, so I think that sort of being a little too reliant on rules that don't really exist, I think is probably the other thing I see a lot of.
Yeah, especially now, and this could just be my own ignorance, as I'm seeing a lot more in the publishing world. There's a lot of hybrid and crossovers. Oh, it's a romance slash, or
Right.
it's a memoir slash cookbook.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my first gut reaction is like, no, it shall be only memoir. It should only be, and just really learning to see, like you said, let's look at the manuscript. How
Right.
is it working? Maybe it is working. Maybe these
Yeah.
crossing genres are, and it's happening a lot in fiction, I see as
Yeah.
well.
Yes. Yes, I agree. And I do also have that same instinct of pick a genre. But as you say, it depends on the book. It could be a really good hybrid. It could be a really great mashup of different genres. Sometimes that's where some of the um, most inventive and entertaining, interesting stories come from. But we also can know that if we're seeing something that doesn't strike us as being successful, that maybe that could be a reason why, that maybe they should privilege one genre over the other in their revision, and that might help make the story more successful. But we can't go in there making that decision. We have to let the manuscript tell us whether that's the right decision or not. Yeah.
And that brings me to a follow-up question of something we briefly discussed before the call that someone from our group here had talked about. Sometimes you get these projects of authors that are incredibly passionate about their work. They've been sitting, working on this manuscript and I would say developing it for 10 years. They're ready to have it edited. They're ready to publish it. They want to submit it to agents, and they want to have either a manuscript critique or a developmental edit. And you start going through it and you realize this project is just not hitting any of the marks it needs to. How do I break the news to the writer? What am I being hired to do? Because ethically, I think we feel the sense that I need to tell them the truth. They need to know that this is not going to work because of X, Y, Z. But at the same time, we don't want to crush their dream. So do you have any suggestions for finding that balance of
Yeah.
communicating? And
This is definitely something that comes up because we'll encounter writers who really just do not have the skill level to succeed. And this story, they should put this story away and try a new story and whatever. But one of the things that I try and do when I take on any new author is ask them about their publishing goals. And so if they are self-publishing, I approach it a little differently because it's not that I won't tell them, this will, readers will have a problem with this, or, I suggest you change how you're approaching this to make it more appealing to readers. I'll say that, but I'm not terribly worried if they agree with me or not, because with self-publishing, that's one of the wonders of self-publishing, is that the author gets to decide. If they want to go the publishing route, I do try to get a little more direct about what I recommend. If you're going to approach publishers with this, and you've opened the book with the protagonist getting up and out of bed, that's not going to fly. Some really trite opening. I'm just going to tell you right off, that's just not going to work. But in terms of like, this is never going to be succeed, no publisher's ever going to buy this or whatever, I don't make marketing decisions for the author or for the publishing world in general. What I always strongly recommend is that authors just try it out in the world. I don't know. There's stuff that I don't like that have things that have been really successful that other people love. I mean, I remember Red October was this book that came out many years ago. It was this techno thriller that put me to sleep. I mean, I snore fast. If that had ever come across my desk, I would have said, there is no way in the world you are ever going to find representation. This book is never going to be published. and just cut all of the junk about the technical specifications of the submarines. Just get rid of all of that. And I would have been wrong. I would have been very wrong about that. So that's always kind of made me kind of a little humble about about what I know about the world, because that appeals to this group of fanatical readers. They love that, and that's okay. I don't edit those books because I don't understand those books. I don't appreciate and love those books. So what I try to remember is that the market is huge. There are lots of readers in the world. There's lots of niches in the world. There's things that do not appeal to me that may appeal to a specific agent or publisher. So I can't make that decision for them. And I want, if an author wants to try to find a publisher, I will give them the advice that I can give them to get their manuscript to that level. But they have to test the market themselves. I mean, I don't think my job is to discourage authors from attempting to pursue their dream. I feel like my role is to let them know my true thoughts about how they could improve their work. But, and I know like there are some agents or editors who will say, oh, this just isn't ready, don't bother. But I'm not that editor. And I think we can't know, whether a particular approach is going to find a home or not. Maybe somebody sees a seed or a glimmer that we don't. And, who knows? So I don't know if that helps, if anyone has any kind of follow-up question about that particular aspect.
I think, Alan, do you want to chip in anything? Because that was a question that you asked us, and I'm glad you acknowledged it in the chat. Yes, we've talked just about this a couple of times, like how direct do we need to be? How much do we say, do we not say? But Alan, do you want to follow up with Tom?
Yeah. And hi, Jennifer. We've never actually met face to face. Great to see you. Yeah, I just had this conversation yesterday with a client that I've been asking about the last few days in the Circle community, and it went well. But basically, this was a first-time novelist who'd published something about 20 years ago that's nonfiction. And she's got, through some professional whatever, she's got a relationship with this cop, friendship with this cop in Germany whose true story was that he kind of fell in love with this Roma pickpocket he arrested woman and wound up being basically led into a sort of life of crime, fall apart through this relationship and her family of thieves. And so there were immediately massive problems of sensitivity. Although they were mitigated somewhat, but so there were problems there, and then there were just lots and lots of storytelling problems. It just was this was not a trained fiction writer. She's perfectly fine with sentences and paragraphs, nothing spectacular, but no problems. But storytelling was just, there was no, because it was really just the true story. She'd only fictionalized a few minor aspects, so it didn't have a proper arc, and it wasn't ready. And she wanted to be traditionally published. She wanted to be traditionally published and then go on to up for like film or television. So big dreams.
Big dreams,
yeah. And so I was wrestling with, what do I communicate back about this, which it's not going to get that. I mean, and I really hear you on the don't make marketing decisions. I'm really taking that to heart. But I was thinking of it more from the agent perspective. I just said, I don't think an agent's going to pick this up. There's too many red flags. So I really worked on and asked folks here and asked folks in other communities and asked sensitivity readers to try to gather my resources for talking about this. And I just presented it as kind of like, listen, it's got some big problems that are going to probably prevent it from being agent ready. It has a great foundation. And it's going to take a lot of work to bring this to the level you need it to. But I think that's exciting work. I think that's fun work. You're going to learn more about all of these characters. You're going to learn more. You're going to fictionalize it much more than you have to make it more suitable for a novel structure and blah, blah, blah. And I just tried to really build in a lot of encouragement. I had no idea how she was going to receive any of that. I was very worried she'd be discouraged, but it went really well. And she was heartened. And so I don't know what I learned yet. I haven't really processed that, but that's
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah. Well, I think it makes sense to do what you did, which is to try and gather some resources and to present your case, which, as you mentioned, um, here's the reasons why that I think you need to do more work on this project before you start submitting it. I think that's a perfectly fair direction to take, and that's what I say when I'm asking about publishing goals. I am direct that if I had someone who brought me a memoir recently, and it was just not going to, no one was going to buy an alcohol recovery memoir now. That just isn't, it's just not something people buy right now. And it still, that doesn't make it not a meaningful project. It doesn't mean that it's not worth writing or anything like that. It's just been a struggle to find any attention. And I was fairly, clear about that, just saying that I think that the market for that is very small. So you'll have difficulty. So it wasn't a situation where I could say, well, have a different experience that you can write about. I can't really tell them in a memoir, sometimes if there is a way that we can change the focus or something, that might be a thing I'll suggest. But this is the kind of thing where, there's no real way to revise it to meet market needs a little better. But again, I just let the author know what I thought, but that, it was well written, and she may need to at some point consider self-publishing, but why not try? Go send out, 50 letters and see what happens. It just takes a little time. Why
And I
not?
think that thing of sending 50 letters out, a lot of authors that want to traditionally publish or even like work with an indie publisher, they don't realize that submission process can be brutal.
Yeah.
And the feedback you're going to, one of the beautiful things about our role, I feel, as a mediator in preparing you for the feedback you're going to be getting later,
Yeah.
because the feedback is much more raw. It's
Yes, it
less
is.
compassionate, especially in the
Yes.
movie and television industry. It can be very painful and very hurtful to hear. So if you're giving this author the positive feedback on these are all the opportunities with your manuscript, this is what you need. And thankfully, there's classes you can take. There's writing groups that you can be a part of to improve that. And if they're committed to the book, I feel most authors that are committed to their project have that perspective, say like, hey, I need to improve this. It's doable. I just need to work a little bit differently on it. So I think that's really valuable. But the feedback they're going to get later, I think, is way more harsh. So
Yes. Yes, it is. And so, so I mean, I try to be direct about, what I think needs to be revised, but I'm also, like Alan was saying, really encouraging and try to motivate them to do the work. But yes, the feedback they'll get, if they get feedback at all, is going to be very raw and very direct. And if we can help them understand that, I mean, because I even have a blog post I wrote about, how to survive the submissions process, because it can be very difficult on your mental health. It can be very brutal.
yeah.
So I think that also, might be part of the conversation you might have with an author who's traditional publishing, who's attempting to get an agent or something. Is just, be prepared, find a time in your life when you can take some blows to your ego, because this is going to be hard.
Yeah.
Let's see, someone mentioned up here, Jennifer, do you have tips for an elevator speech? And I wanted to get that before I forgot. For an elevator speech, if the person who wrote that question is here, are you talking about as an editor elevator speech or as a writer elevator speech?
Hi, it's actually,
Yeah, okay, great.
I was actually asking as a copy editor.
Okay, yeah, so like when you meet somebody at a party or whatever, and they say, what do you do? And you say, I'm a copy editor, and then they say, well, what? Yeah, so I just try and find some sort of fun little way to explain what I do. I mean, I make sure the commas are all in the right place, or I mean, that might be a little too simplistic for what you want. But I think just trying to come up with a sentence or two that captures the skill involved, And then also, I think it helps if you can communicate what you love about it. So, I'm the person who makes sure that, everything is spelled correctly, the commas are in all the right places. And what I really love about this work is I'm very detail oriented, and it really, I love looking, I'm a librarian in the past life. I love looking things up. I love making sure that Charles, who was bald in chapter 1, doesn't grow hair in chapter 3. I love that stuff. You know what I mean? So just try and give a little bit of the personal to it. I find that is pretty effective, because the skill itself is probably pretty easy to describe, but it's the connection to why you do the work that I think people really want to hear. And that's also good in any situation, like if you're introducing yourself to a new client, or to maybe you're reaching out to publishers to see if you can get work from them. Just that, I sleep with the Chicago Manual of Style, that just makes them feel like they get to know you a little bit. And to make it a little more about who you are as a person. At least that's been helpful and has worked for me.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Great. And so, Jennifer, you having worked in-house, or did you work in-house, remind me, with publishers and then went freelance, or was it always freelance working with some of these big publishers?
It's mostly been freelance, and then for a while I was in-house on a contract for a couple of years. So it's been almost the entirety of my career has been freelance.
And as a developmental editor working with these, and I'm trying to put myself in position of some of our members here, like we would like to work for Simon & Schuster or for Penguin Random. Yeah. What are some of the qualities, or what do we have to be very good at to be able to demonstrate to a publisher, we've got the chops of what you need for this project? What is it from the publisher side? What do you think they're looking for? And I know that this has changed a lot over the last 2 or 3 years with the advent of AI, with more indie publishers, and with some companies merging together. So the industry is really, I feel like, in a big flux right now. But what have you noticed? I think there's some indispensable qualities that are always true, though, regardless.
Yeah, I agree. I think that even with the industry, whatever is happening, there are some things that are always important to keep in mind when you're approaching publishers for work. One of them is that just the basic things like I know how to meet deadlines. I know how to be flexible. If a project doesn't come in right on the day it's supposed to come in, I know that I'm going to have to be flexible and accept that that's life. Publishers have very short turnarounds. I just spoke with a publisher last week that wanted someone who could give developmental feedback on an 80,000 word manuscript in 3 to 5 days.
Oh
Which,
my God.
yeah, right. So
I thought that was horrible.
Yeah, I thought that was ridiculous. Yeah, I was surprised that they think that they can run an editorial production schedule like that. But so I don't think you should be that flexible. I mean, I think there's sanity, and then I think there's toxic work environments. But that really fast-paced environment is still a thing. You still have to kind of be able to work quickly and to deal with little interruptions that come along. An author's a day or two late with their manuscript or things like that, and that will crunch your time. They're not going to extend the production schedule because the author's late, unless the author is 6 months late. But if the author's a couple days late, that just affects you. They don't really care. You just still need to get it done. But I think if you're reaching out to publishing companies, the most important thing to show is some kind of corporate experience, some kind of business experience, because just working with indie authors is great for getting other indie author clients, but it's not very meaningful to publishers because they don't know that any particular indie author has the ability to judge your skills. So I've often said I could get paid a lot of money if I would just tell authors, I love everything you did in the book. That's great. Give me $2,000. You know, I could be a millionaire if that's all I did as an editor, because that's really what authors want to hear. Now, again, that's an oversimplification. Authors do want to improve. They want to write really good books. But for the publisher, an endorsement from an indie author doesn't tell them anything about your skills. So if you can find connections to other work you've done, especially, it doesn't have to specifically be editorial work. If, for example, I've had some students who are teachers who are able to bring in their success as a teacher into like their letter of introduction to get interest from a publisher, to show that they can be a team player, that they understand, that they have a certain knowledge that the publisher is looking for. And then again, any kind of corporate or business editing experience, even if it's not exactly in the field that you're interested in getting into, can help. And I often recommend that people start like with the work that they already have some credentials for doing. So for example, if you edit a nonfiction newsletter or magazine and you'd love to edit fiction, to get fiction publishers is still going to be a little hard, but you could get a nonfiction publisher client. And once you have a nonfiction publisher client or two, it's much easier to move over to fiction because they're looking for the publishing experience. They're not necessarily looking for a specific type of editorial skill. Because if you look at how publishing companies hire, you'll see that somebody's working for a children's publishing company 1 year, and the next year they're working for a home and garden company, and then the following year they're running a mystery imprint. So they're looking more for the ability to work within the parameters of the publishing company because a lot of that can be taught. A lot of, like I said, the skills can be taught, and they will, and most companies, even for freelancers, will expect that there is an onboarding process of helping you understand their process and making sure you're up to what they need to do.
I love this, and this excites me a lot about what you're saying, because we've had this conversation also here at the Networking Studio the last few weeks about when are we being our own gatekeepers and rejecting
Yes.
work because we think we're not qualified or it doesn't meet everything, all of those things on our checklist, and how might that be affecting work that we could possibly be doing that we're
Right.
qualified for, but that we either don't trust ourselves or our
Right.
imposter syndrome is creeping in. Or it's not that, the type of work I want to be doing now. So
Yeah.
could you speak a little bit about that? And I think that goes to the flexibility we discussed at the beginning.
Right. So one thing that I think is important is to be able to see bridges between what you're doing now and what you're comfortable doing now and the thing that you'd like to do or think you could do, or maybe you're being asked to do. So if you already edit fiction, then somebody who has a memoir, you might still be able to edit the memoir. It's using very similar storytelling techniques, and you would just have to, do a little brushing up on what memoir is. So, read some articles about memoir, read a book or two about memoir, take a class about memoir, take a writer's class about memoir, and then you can do the work justice. I've always said that if we're reading carefully and conscientiously and doing our best to provide helpful feedback, in the worst case scenario, we're not damaging anything. Like, in the worst case, we're maybe not adding a lot of value, but we're not wrecking anything. So if we're doing it, with this authentic intention of helping, we're probably going to be fine. So I do have, it doesn't come up, not really with editors that much, but it does come up where someone will think, I read a book once, I can, I can be an editorial director. It doesn't really happen that much in editing, but it does happen where people will overestimate their ability and underestimate the skill needed for a particular product or whatever. But I think as editors, we tend to be more inclined to go the other way, where we're not challenging ourselves as much as we could, or we're a little too, as you say, we're being gatekeepery on ourselves because we're a little worried that we won't succeed. And I have not succeeded multiple times. So, and I'm still, having a wonderful career. I've taken on projects that, not a lot, but I've taken on projects that I realized partway through that I was not going to be able to complete because I just did not have maybe the subject matter knowledge or the skills to deal with whatever the problem was. But the vast majority of the time, 97% of the time, let's say, I've figured those skills out as I've gone along. And so, now and then I'll meet something that scares me, but I have the confidence of knowing, most of the time I can figure it out. And when I haven't figured it out, it has not killed me or anybody else. It has been okay. I've survived. I've had some ego damage. I've been hurt my feelings, but it hasn't had any long lasting effect.
That's excellent. And I love that we're not going to do more segments, I think is a key reminder for some of these works. And for me, I think also I've learned, and I've reflected a lot upon this last year, that when I started off, I was just so rigorous. I was just so extremely rigorous about things and, so stuck on the rules because of that fear of doing things the wrong way or damaging the manuscript, when I could have been a little bit more lenient and flexible and not so tied up in the knots about things. But one of the questions that we have from Catherine was, you talk about gaining the skills and all the hard things, but what about when you're suffering from, and imposter syndrome is something that comes up continuously every year in the editing world. Do you have any recommendations for editors that are?
I do. This one does come up a lot, and I actually have a blog post on it. If you just go to the Club Ed Freelancers website, just search for imposter syndrome, and it'll pop up. Because I think there are some helpful hints. It's a pretty comprehensive blog post about what you can do. But I think with imposter syndrome, it really helps just to sort of look around and say, okay, these people who I know don't have as many skills as I have are successful. These people who, whatever. Comparison can be the thief of joy, but it can also be a really good way to sort of do some perspective taking. Like, wait a minute, this person's only been an editor for 2 years and they're already, the senior editor at this magazine that I am, would love to work for. If you can recognize that in the whole world of editors, you have a lot of skills and you have a lot of ability and a lot of talent. You just have to believe that about yourself. One thing that I have a friend who struggles with imposter syndrome, who talks about sending her that little voice on her shoulder, little speaking in her ear, you can't do this, you can't do this. She sends her to an island. She just, negative Nelly goes to the island while my friend works on whatever she's working on. And it's just like this deliberate, I'm not going to listen to those voices right now. I'm going to do this anyway. That I think can be helpful. But more than anything, it's just to kind of get comfortable with that feeling that you are an imposter. Just like, okay, if I'm an imposter, then I guess I'm just going to be the best imposter I can be. Just to live with that uncertainty and to say, maybe I'm not the best editor or maybe whatever, and that's okay. I still am entitled to a wonderful, happy life, filled with lots of books. So it's very difficult, but I think that just kind of learning to like go through that anyway. Just, I'm feeling uncertain. I don't think I can do this. I'm feeling like I don't have the skills or whatever, and just go ahead and do. Because I've been doing this for 20 years, and there are still times when I'm like, oh my God, do I even know what I'm doing? Because that's just, we're careful people. We care about what we do. We're thinking people. We have empathy. We don't want to screw things up. Of course, we're going to have self-doubts. The people who don't have self-doubts are the people who do the most damage, right? Because they have nothing to stop them. So for those of us who have self-doubts, that's actually a good thing. That's a little break to say, to keep us from barreling ahead into danger. Just, to say, wait a minute, let me take a
Yeah.
minute to collect myself. Am I doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time? And
And I want to remind everyone, Jennifer's saying this, that she experiences that as well. Like some projects come up and you're like, oh, am I really the best fit? And I mentioned, I think last week here to the group, that there's this one publisher that I absolutely love that I've worked for before. And then when I'm always afraid to reach out to them because I just like them, I admire them so much. But every time I reach out to them, they always offer me work. And then my first reaction is like, no, I can never edit this. I'm not qualified. I don't. And
yeah.
2 weeks ago, I reached out and they sent me a project, which is great. It's long. It'll keep me busy for 2 months. And my first reaction was like, I don't know the first thing about rock climbing. Why should I be editing? It's like,
Right.
that's not what it's, and so it's that imposter syndrome, even if you're an experienced editor, will continue to creep in
Yeah.
all the time, but it's knowing the techniques of how do you manage it and, set it aside or remind yourself all the qualities and all the hard work you've done up to here to
Yeah.
get to where you are, to, that you get offered these projects. Marie, you had a question. Would you like to ask it?
Yes, thanks. I guess this is a marketing question. So
Sure.
I'm transitioning from a career 30 plus years in
Yeah.
federal government as a government lawyer. So I have a lot of experience
yeah.
editing various kinds of, not just legal
Oh, yeah.
documents, but talking points, policy papers, white papers.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how to market myself. I wasn't an editor. That wasn't in my title and it wasn't part of my job description, but I have a lot of experience
Yeah.
doing that. And so I don't know how to sort of present that.
Yeah.
I can't give,
Yeah.
I don't have a client, that's not a client I can point to for
Yeah.
testimonial.
What kind of are you looking for freelance work just from legal firms or from book publishers or from independent authors? What kind of people are you targeting for your services?
I guess, first of all, not legal. I think I want to get away from that. I'm interested in
Okay.
editing nonfiction, though, not
Yeah.
fiction.
Okay.
Fiction. And I'm open, I mean, freelance, I think, but I'm
Yeah.
open to sort of
Yeah.
what kinds of.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that the one lovely thing about being a freelancer, especially if you're going to be working maybe with individual clients or with small businesses or that kind of thing, is that you don't submit a resume to anybody, so the job title doesn't really matter. What matters is to identify those skills, those transferable skills. So one thing that I would recommend doing is not worrying about what job title you had, or if someone called your former boss, what they would say your duties were, but what did you do and how does that apply to the kind of work you want to do? Because this kind of thing, with you're talking about this, I know lots of publishers have interest in technical reviewers who can do that kind of review of technical or legal documents. In your case, it would be legal. They're looking for a technical reviewer who has legal background who can do that kind of work. Or they're looking for an editor who has subject matter expertise, and that's what you can emphasize, like in a letter or an application to them, and not so much worry about what the job title was. And if you're just like I don't know, putting up a website or introducing yourself to people or whatever, then I would just pull out those specific skills you had. Like you're talking about writing policy or editing policy papers, position papers, white papers, that whatever it might be. That is really great, valuable knowledge. That is something people will pay for you to do for them. So just pull out those specific tasks that you've done, and don't worry so much about what the specific job title was. And then, if you were with one particular company for a long time or several different companies, you can sort of you can talk about adapt. Like if you work for 3 different companies, then you talk about how you adapted to different styles, or how you adapted to different working cultures, or you adapted to different mission statements, whatever. You're showing your adaptability. If not, if it was 30 years at one company, then you're going to focus on how deep your skill went. Like this was lot of years of learning how to be really good at writing and editing this kind of work. And so, yeah, so I wouldn't let the job title stop you. I would just focus on the specific skills that you can see transferring to what different types of clients would need from you. Does that help at all?
Absolutely. That's very helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. We have 4 minutes left. So
Okay.
any other questions? This is the time to speak up, to let Jennifer know what's on your, Melissa, please. Yeah.
Hi, Jennifer. It's so nice to meet you. I've done a
Thank
lot of
you.
your self-paced courses.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm working as contracting as a dev editor with a publisher, and they have us do 2 rounds of dev edits and then facilitate the beta read, which kind of turns into a bit of a 3rd round.
Yes.
And I've
Good
found
point.
that I
Mhm.
feel like I, by the end, am so immersed in the manuscripts that I'm
Yeah.
no longer able to give like that separate feedback because
Yeah.
I've seen it in
Yeah.
so many forms. Do you have any
Yeah.
advice on how I might like cleanse my palette or reapproach it with new insights?
That's a really tough one because I feel like you personally probably cannot affect that process and have them do it differently because I think
Yeah.
that's a backwards process. But one thing that might help, and which has helped me sometimes, is to encounter the manuscript in a different way. So normally we sit at our desks and we read the manuscript. So I sometimes, if I'm at the point where I'm so familiar with the manuscript, I don't know what it says anymore. I know what I think it says. You know, what it actually says. It could be anything. I use the read aloud function on Word, and I just have it read to me, and that helps immeasurably because then you do pick up like, okay, wait a minute, I don't remember hearing that Michael was introduced before. Okay, so that has helped me in the past. And then if you can put a project or some different type of brain food between the rounds of the editing, that can help too. So if you can get another project going in between, could even be like your own writing project or something that's going to absorb your attention and get you out of that author's story world and into either like a different story world or into a different creative process. If you're not a writer, maybe you have another creative process you do, painting or crochet or whatever. Maybe get some of that in there just to break up this constant immersion in the story world to where you can't really effectively analyze it anymore. Does that help at all?
Yes, thank you so
Okay.
much. I appreciate that.
Good. Any other final questions? Anyone else?
Final questions? So I'm going to put Jennifer's website here where you can find her courses, the group.
Oh,
And tell
yes.
us a little bit, do you want to tell us just maybe in a minute, Jennifer, about your courses and the group that you run there at Club Ed?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yes, so Club Ed Freelancers is an education company where everyone from like a new editor who doesn't even know the differences between copy editing and development or whatever, they can find that out, up to more advanced skill levels, including like editing a full manuscript and then having me review it. People sometimes take that class when they have a manuscript from a client that they're struggling with, whether they want to take a series of classes or just get my feedback on that one thing, that's fine. And then I do have a little membership program there where people do some accountability, and we do a marketing challenge and things like that, which people really enjoy. The marketing challenge is really helpful for marketing shy editors, and we do those once a quarter, so that's a lot of fun. One thing I did want to mention before we take off is the imposter syndrome thing. I failed to mention one thing that I think we should all do, and that's to keep an accomplishment list or like a folder full of nice things people say about you, because that can be a really great way to remind yourself of why you do what you do and that you have done really good work in the past that people have liked. So I strongly recommend kind of reporting that down. And that also helps when it comes time for you to talk with potential clients, because you can go back to your accomplishments list and find some specific examples of things you've done that might connect with things that they need. So thank you guys, everyone. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was excellent. This is great. I think we've all left with some really valuable nuggets that we're going to think about and keep the conversation going. Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us, for sharing authentically everything that you know and what you've learned and what can make us better editors. One of the things that I do want to recommend, if you and I think Melissa and I, we discussed this, that if you're not able to take the live classes, you can do the self-paced class or get another editor that wants to do the self-paced class too, and you can each, get the class and then meet up and do it together.
Do it together.
Ideas.
That one, people love to do that. That's very popular to take the self-paced class together to sort of encourage each other and
yeah. And then I have to admit that every time I start a new dev edit, I will pull up my notes from the class and my highlights of your class, and I'll make sure I'll read those before I tackle any project so that I'm not forgetting anything. So
I love hearing that. Thank you.
Your classes are really wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.
I hope to see you all next week. We have a couple of other events coming up that we'll talk about, and some new guests visiting us as well. But have a great rest of the week, and let's keep the conversation going and your takeaways, if you guys don't mind, on the Circle chat space. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.